Well, we're here with Professor J. Eric Dietz with the Purdue University Homeland Security Institute. And Professor, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for asking me to join you.
Absolutely. You all have been doing some, I think, really interesting and timely research on a subject that, look, all Americans care deeply about, the safety of our kids when they're at school. So you've been doing research into the most effective ways to combat an active shooter, right?
Correct. Yeah, we looked at the active shooter scenario and tried to come up with ways that we might better advise the policymakers across the nation about how to handle these things in the most effective way of reducing casualties within the schools.
Okay, so what were some of the things that you looked at?
Well, we looked at the active shooter scenarios from a perspective of what's the best way to combat that, or what's the best defensive mechanism. So we looked at locked doors, we looked at security resource officers, and we looked at concealed carry, and looked at those relative to one another as to which policy decisions could we make that conserve or reduce the number of casualties.
Okay, so sort of the control then was the school that didn't have a resource officer, didn't have any concealed carry holders on staff.
Yes.
As you say, it was just that locked door,
Yes,
keeping the active shooter out. What was the control? I mean, obviously that's got to be the highest number of casualties, the longest response time, right?
Right, that was what we found. We found that response times are the highest, as much as 10 minutes or 12 minutes, the national average response for law enforcement. We found that the casualties were right around 20 casualties during that time frame, based upon historical active shooter data.
Okay, so you introduce a school resource officer into the equation, which admittedly not every school district is going to be able to afford,
Yeah.
but if you're able to introduce a school resource officer into that scenario, what happens then?
Well, then we reduce casualties to almost, or reduce response time to about 20%, maybe 25%, and we reduce the casualties by at least 2/3. And we do this by modeling that over hundreds and hundreds of repetitions. So we can try the distribution of active shooter behaviors as well as school behaviors for concealed carry or for response time of the resource officer. So we get to do this in ways that we would never dream of doing in real life, and trying our policies out over many, many trials.
Okay, so obviously concealed carry in the schools, it's a controversial topic among some folks. What did your model show when you introduced a percentage of the staff that had a concealed firearm?
Well, we tried 5 and 10% ratios of staff, administration, and teachers that had concealed carry, and we assumed a very, very conservative approach in that the teachers or the administrators with concealed carry sheltered in place with the students or whoever were with them, and they basically engaged the shooter when they came into that room. We couldn't imagine a more conservative scenario and perhaps maybe a safer scenario for the average concealed carry person. And we saw as much as a 10 or 15% reduction in casualties and a similar reduction in response time because we've got more weapons around. That tended to be, from the law enforcement and the military folks, more friendly guns in a firefight are probably good guns in a firefight, kind of decision making.
Right. Okay, and then the last scenario that you looked at was that combination where
Yes.
you had a school resource officer, but in addition to that, you also had a percentage of the staff or faculty that were concealed carry holders. Did that make a big difference?
Yeah, that was what we saw was the greatest difference. A concealed carry and the resource officer had the fewest casualties and the lowest response time because, again, you have the highest probability over many, many trials, many active shooter instances of trying to engage the shooter early. And again, that's the most important thing. And I think this is important work as you start to think about all of our communities that struggle with budgets and struggle, well, how do we deal with this problem? And we could deal with it by hiring a lot more cops, but we're still not perhaps going to have enough law enforcement officers to really reduce that response time much below that 10-minute time frame. They have so many things they have to do that this seemed to be a good, prudent way that we could at least start the science argument in the concealed carry as opposed to the emotion argument. Clearly, we'd all wish we never have a school shooting event, but a school shooting event, one is too many, and perhaps if every child saved is vital.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what this debate, regardless of whether you're an NRA member or you're a mom demanding action for gun sense in America, the debate isn't really a debate at all. We all want the same thing. We all want to make sure that our kids are as safe as possible when they're at school, when they're
Absolutely.
away from us. That's the issue.
Absolutely, and that was our goal. In fact, We're continuing this research with other students right now, looking at what are the gun risks for having concealed carry weapons around or having resource officers around. And we want to be able to find, again, a scientific measure to compare those risks for the 99% plus portion of the time that we don't have an active shooter in the schools. And we think, again, it's vital to make sure that we have an apple-to-apple comparison, if you will, and try to compare 100% of the time and what's the safety factors for having a few guns around in the right hands with the right training. We can even use this model for other things. We can start to use it for look at evacuation scenarios and other policy and training scenarios. We might further reduce casualties, for instance, if we actually did more training with the concealed carry faculty and asked them to take a little bit more active defense.
So it sounds like, again, taking the emotion out of this, just based on what your research has shown to date, and I realize, again, you're going to be doing more research exploring this, I get the sense, Dr. Deese, that concealed carry among a percentage of the faculty is something that seems to be a good idea, a valuable tool.
That's what our research is showing right now, is it could produce a small additional number of saved students in an active shooter scenario. And that's what we think is so important. Let's go back to the data and let's try to decide what are the risks, what are the benefits, and make our policy decisions based on the sum of both of those.
Okay, so this research is not yet published, but it will be available soon for people to take a look at?
Yes, absolutely. We're in the process of getting it in the journals right now.
Okay, well, I hope that we can have you back on again, because when the next round of research that you're doing is finished, I'd love to talk about this, because we do need to have this conversation. We do need to have this talk, and we do need to make sure that, again, what we're talking about isn't our emotions, it's not how we feel, but it's what the data shows.
Absolutely. We all loathe the idea that anybody with a firearm would come in our schools and threaten our kids. And I think this is about how do we best protect them, not how we react emotionally to that issue. And we're just so happy you guys are here in Indianapolis, and that Purdue's nearby and we're able to come see you today and talk about this research.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad to have you here. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cam.
Thank you.